And now I turn the floor over to Ms. Marla Boltman. You have the floor.
Thank you. Just a note that I will be presenting both with myself and my colleague in our opening remarks. Good morning, Mr. Chair and honorable members of the committee. On behalf of Friends and the tens of thousands of Canadians who've entrusted us to be their voice in Ottawa on Bill C-18, we are very pleased to speak with you today. We also look forward to the day where, like Mr. Geist, we need no introduction. In preparing to be here, we spent a lot of time revisiting what has been said about the Canadian news sector over the past several years. Not surprisingly, the same words have been used over and over. You've heard them before, they bear repeating. Extinction, bloodbath, hemorrhaging, critical condition, life support. But now, the Canadian news sector has been given the gift of hope in the form of the Online News Act, ably crafted by the House in its capacity as emergency room physician. And you, the Senate, can provide key surgical interventions by introducing thoughtful and precise amendments to not only ensure that Canadian news media outlets are properly compensated for their work, but that the framework to achieve that objective prioritizes public trust and confidence. Because let's face it, the defining issue of our time is trust, specifically the lack of it in news media. This mistrust is cultivated nearly every day, often for harmful reasons, through the deliberate spread of misinformation and disinformation. It is a diverse and destructive trend, one that corrodes our ability to embrace shared truths and agree on fundamental facts, one that undermines a civil society and a fully functioning democracy. An independent and authoritative news media will help to offset this trend by serving on a check on those who traffic in misinformation and by challenging those in positions of power. But to play this role, news media organizations must be strong and they must be sustainable. And C-18 can help with that, but they must also be transparent. Our proposed three-part amendment addresses a theme throughout the bill that seems to favor privacy over disclosure when it comes to deals between online platforms and news outlets. We feel very strongly it should be the other way around. Public disclosure is the best safeguard to prevent undue influence over the journalistic and editorial independence of our news. Canadians have a right to know which online platforms compensate which news outlets, to what extent, and in what way.
Grâce aux modifications apportées par le Comité du patrimoine, une plus grande transparence est maintenant exigée de la part de Radio-Canada.
Because of the Heritage Committee, enhanced transparency is now required of CBC Radio-Canada, as it should be. Again, Canadians have a right to know how their national public broadcaster is funded and where and how that money is spent. Taxpayers have a legitimate interest in ensuring the value of CBC Radio-Canada's news content is recognized and compensated under the Act so that revenues can be generated from this regulatory regime can be reinvested, particularly in regional and local news content, something that CBC is uniquely positioned to provide. While we're fully aware of the arguments of those who feel that CBC Radio-Canada should be excluded from this legislation, time and again the polls and ratings show that it remains one of the most relied upon and trusted sources of news and information for Canadians. It is our sincere hope that the urgent need to resuscitate the Canadian news sector, which undeniably includes CBC Radio-Canada, will prove more powerful than the lure of using this bill as a forum to fight other battles. Before we conclude, we would like to draw your attention to the Guiding Principles on Diversity of Content Online, published by the Government of Canada in June 2021. Its purpose was to guide actions and measures that would foster greater exposure to diverse cultural content, information, and news online in order to contribute to a healthier public discourse, greater social inclusion, bolster resilience to disinformation and misinformation, and increase citizens' ability to participate in democratic processes. These are ambitious and admirable goals, all of which are achievable in part through the passing of Bill C-18. With a few key amendments that favor transparency over privacy, the Online News Act can breathe life back into our news outlets in such a way that 5 years from now, when Parliament revisits this legislation, the words we will use to describe the Canadian news ecosystem will be resilient, credible, independent, diverse, and healthy.